Zelensky has wanted to meet Putin. He wants that media opportunity. That is that's Custard's last stand in media terms for Zelensky to do something, do some gesture, say something, and that the Western media and everybody's going to rally around to say, look, he stood up to that evil dictator, Vladimir Putin. And that'll be Zelensky's last chance to captivate the global audience, of course. So it's not in Russia's interest to, play the part in a staged media event by the U.S. and Ukraine. But what he really wants is he wants that would reset the situation for a wave of support for him and for finance and weapons. But you have to understand something. If Zelensky actually made any concessions that moved towards a political settlement, a negotiated settlement, he would get the immediate backlash of the hardliners in Ukraine. And these are hardliners, I'm sure, that he fears that pose an existential threat to him, his life, and of course his administration, which is out of mandate. So he's already on thin ice. And if he gives any ground that the hardliners are not going to like, you could have like mutiny of a number of battalions. He will immediately be threatened, and he will be regarded as a traitor by them. So and Russia knows all this. That's another reason why Russia's like, this is a waste of time. Why would we bother? So because they know it was like Russia's already gamed this out way ahead, and it's almost like the U.S. is still playing checkers on this. So I mean, I just don't see anything new here. That's the problem, Daniel. I'm looking for new clues that say this is different. This is fundamentally different. At least something, details, or some position that's reestablished by Washington. It looks like it's a promising foothold towards something significant. I don't see it. Just Putin in a phone call and meeting Trump, it's not enough. That somehow, because if Donald doesn't understand the contents of the deal or the geography or the historical significance or, what might happen, what could derail it, and appreciate all these things, then what's the point of him meeting Vladimir Putin anyway? I don't know.
Now, I do have some reports about what some are claiming that the various sides are asking for, what did happen behind the scenes. We'll get to that in just a second. But I want to address one other aspect first, because you're kind of really talking about what I think you're cutting through all the BS and stuff, and you're just looking at the issues and what they actually mean. But a lot of people aren't cutting through the BS. In fact, they might even be piling more on, because there's already a move afoot to pat President Trump on the back and talk about what a great leader he is and how strong he is. And here is Mike Gallagher, who was saying basically Putin blinked, and that's why we have this meeting.
In addition to the president's threat of sanctions, I think there are two other variables that increase our negotiating position and increase the likelihood of a durable ceasefire or some outcome that would be successful. One is the congressional threat of sanctions. Lindsey Graham's bill seems to be gaining steam. That enhances the president's negotiating position to be able to point to Congress and say, it's not just me in our system, it's also the United States Congress. It's called a two-level game. The second is the president's recent surge of conventional and strategic military power, repositioning nuclear submarines. The president has proven willing to wield hard power effectively, and that is the ultimate deterrent, and that's the language that Russia understands.
So in his telling here that it's Trump's threat of more sanctions and the putting of these weapons that has caused Putin to say, oh, darn, I guess I better submit to what Trump wants. And that means that he's going to get some kind of a concession from the Russian side that's against Russia's will. I mean, just react to that. I'll go leave it there.
That's one of the key elements in all this is the timeline. Okay. And the hardliners in the United States, whoever they are, the Grahams of the world and the rest of them. And in Europe, the biggest hardline faction is the UK. And if you look at the statements by the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in just the last couple of days about wanting to stop regarding Russia's shadow fleet of tankers as threat to global security, threat to everybody's national security. And so they need to be destroyed. And so Russia leaked a report from about sabotage operations in the Baltic Sea to basically hobble the Russian, quote, shadow fleet, i.e. Sanctions busting shipping that's going around the world, and then leaning on India for buying Russian oil. This is another major move this week by the United States. India's buying Russian oil and then reselling it to Europe at a profit because the West has put a price cap on the Russian oil. I mean, you can't make this up. So India's making plenty of money. They're not happy about being targeted with secondary sanctions. India's too big of an economy, too big of a force to intimidate like that. So is China. So I don't think the U.S. is going to really get anywhere with that. But the hardliners, Daniel, the hardliners in the U.S., in Britain and in Europe, they believe that given enough time, we can hurt Russia and we can bring Putin to his knees and bring him to the negotiation table. That's what I said at the beginning of the conversation, was try to create leverage, because the Trump administration believes that if they can just create a bit more leverage, they can get a better deal. That's how they're approaching this. This doesn't work in this situation. This is a fatal flaw of the approach of the United States government, the current administration. It's a major fatal flaw, because they're basically saying that everything that happened before this in history is null and void and irrelevant, and all that matters now is just the leverage to do a deal now. And it's much, much deeper than that. The other parties are taking so much more into consideration. And I don't even think they got the economics right on the sanctions. They're still deluded in America. They think that sanctions is a potent weapon against the Russian Federation. And then the tariffs are going to be like the sort of right hook. The sanctions are the left hook. And so we're going to, once again, we will bring the Soviet Union to their knees by choking them off and getting in an arms race and all these things. So we're back in the 80s again, sort of recycling some of these old ideas that, if you look back in history, didn't actually play out the way a lot of people in Washington claim they did back then. And so this is a chronic problem of Washington, is using tropes from the past and basing policy directions on that. Like, this is going to be their Afghanistan, Ukraine. It's going to be another Afghanistan, like we did with the Soviets. That ended the Cold War and we won. The Star Wars bankrupted the Russians. The arms race, we brought them in. The reality is it's much more complex than that.
Yeah.
Talk to any economist. But I see the same type of things informing policy now, that it means that the stuff is just not fully baked at all. And so the results aren't going to be there. That's a problem. So then just extend the timeline. Wonder weapons, another round of wonder weapons. If this doesn't work, then it'll be another round of wonder weapons. That buys you like 6 months. And so we could be into 2026, spring of 2026, and more or less in the same place as we are now.
Yeah, well, that again, that's just really frustrating to hear, because we see it play out. It's detached from reality, and it's just like, well, it's just, I think to your point, drag the timeline out, so maybe something will appear and magically, and all the things. Even though we say yes to the left hook, right hook that you talked about, sanctions, tariffs, even though it has caused wreckage across the board and has been utterly failed and everything, but maybe next time, maybe it'll work then. That's what it seems to me is going on here. One of the things I want to talk here a little bit differently. We talked about, like British, you've mentioned sort of the British stuff, some other Europeans. We've seen what the United States, and we talked about Russia. The one we hadn't talked about so far is Ukraine. And Zelensky kind of seems to be just a sidebar player in this, that the rest of them are talking around. But he also made a comment yesterday, and it's kind of interesting to me for a couple of different reasons. Let's see what you see.
Якраз дорогою від наших бригад тут на Сумщині я говорив з президентом Трампом, і це розмова після того, як представник президента Трампа Стів Вітков був у Москві. Наша спільна з партнерами позиція, вона абсолютно конкретна, вона абсолютно прозора. Війну треба закінчувати і робити це чесно. Це дуже важливо, робити це чесно. На дзвінку були європейські лідери. Я вдячний кожному за підтримку. Ми обговорили, що звучало в Москві. Схоже, Росія тепер більше налаштована на припинення вогню. Тиск на них спрацьовує. Але головне, щоб вони не обманули нас в деталях, ані нас, ані Сполучені Штати. І ми запропонували, щоб найближчим часом наші представники України та партнерів, наші радники з питань безпеки говоритимуть, щоб визначити нашу позицію, нашу спільну позицію і наш спільний погляд. Для нас, для України це дуже важливо. Україна точно захистить свою незалежність. Нам усім потрібен тривалий.
Yeah, the devil's in the details there. The definition is even more important. When you say a just and lasting peace, I mean, that kind of echoes what Keir Starmer's been saying, and that is very different from the definition given in Moscow. But it did seem to me, from my ears, that he was somewhat less defiant on this one and more like, well, I really hope it ends up this way. How do you see his play here in comparison to Russia, Trump, and the European Union?
This is he's kind of on desperate straits right now. One of the things as well, just a superficial comment on that video, Zelensky takes so much care, I think, to curate the public relations of every type of statement he puts out on social media or on television. And that was like behind a dilapidated elementary school playground set. And it's not a very good look for Zelensky. So he's basically saying it's time to end the war. It's time. Why would he be saying that? Why? That's a reflection of what's going on in Ukrainian society. Okay. So he is feeling the heat. He's feeling the pressure. There's a lot of talk about corruption investigations right now. He is implicated in some of that talk. Plus, replacing him, the British are dangling Zelensky around right now, you know, like basically sending a signal to Zelensky, look out, he's coming. And there's not going to be room for both of you in Kiev, full stop. Or it could be somebody else. So, and I'm sure Russia, U.S. knows that this idea of Zelensky being a counterparty to any sector, that's been off the table for a long time. U.S. knows that. So Zelensky, I think it's going to happen very quickly for him when it does. He'll have a very short window of opportunity to get out of the country before something bad happens to him. Unfortunately, that's just the situation there. But so who knows when that's going to happen? But I'm sure that's part of the calculus between Moscow and Washington. Because if that's a deal breaker for Moscow, then it's kind of easy for the U.S. to engineer a regime change in Kiev. That's not a difficult thing. I wouldn't think so. And the heir apparent is waiting in London. He's been groomed for this actual thing, which is the former commander of the Ukrainian armed forces, Valery Zelensky. Okay, and he's been given elocution lessons. He's wearing a Savile Row suit. They have scrubbed him up nice, and he's got his memoirs out in a bookstore near you now. So he's like, they've established him as only the British can do. The British can do political makeovers better than anybody. Look what they did with Jelani in Damascus. I mean, that's a British operation. So Zelensky is primed and ready for the world stage. The question is, what would that entail? So that's what I'm guessing. Looking at Zelensky, he's out of mandate. He's not going to run for president again. He's holding up the deal. It's not looking good for him.